All right, awesome. This meeting is now being recorded. So with that wait a minute. Oh, perfect. Sounds good. So we'll call this meeting to order at 3:02 p.m. And before we get started, I would just like to, we would like to respectfully acknowledge that the SFSS is located on the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Coquitlam, and Katzie nations. And unceded means that these territories have never been handed over, sold, or given up by these nations, and we are currently situated on occupied territories. And also keeping in mind that during the COVID-19 pandemic, we are all, working from different locations, whether that be within BC, within the country, or maybe even outside of the country. So just taking the time to acknowledge the lands that we are privileged to work on today. So we will move into agenda item number 3, which is the roll call of attendance. We will, I'll start with myself. Hi, everyone. My name is Gabe. I'm the VP University Relations and chair of this committee. My pronouns are he, him, his, and my access needs are met currently. We'll move on to the president.
Hi, everyone. My name is Asad. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and all my access needs have been met.
Thank you, Asad. We'll move on to the VP Finance.
Hi, Corbett, VP Finance. Pronouns are he, him, his. My access needs are met. Thank you.
Thank you, Corbett. VP Student Services.
Hi, Matthew Provost. My pronouns are he, him, his. And as of right now, I'm trying to cook and be here at the same time. So I might have to get up and go get my lunch. But other than that, I'll be here. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Matt. At-large representative.
Hi, I'm Bilquis, she, her, hers. My access needs are met. Just want to let everyone know that I'm very low energy. So.
Cool. Okay, thank you for letting us know. I'm just trying to get Wei Chen. He's trying to join the meeting, but it's not working for him. So if I'm kind of dividing my attention, that's why. But we'll move into our society staff, campaigns, research, and policy coordinator. Oh no, she's not on the call today. That's okay. And we'll just go back to our science representative before we move on. If you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, Wei Chen, pronouns he, him, his. Access needs are met.
Thank you, Wei Chen. Executive Director.
Hi, everybody. It's Sylvia. She, her, hers. I have a terrible headache, so I'll probably be very quiet.
Thank you, Sylvia. Hope you're feeling better. Executive Assistant.
Hi, everyone. Shanika. My pronouns she or her, and my access needs are met.
Thank you, Shanika. Administrative Assistant.
Hi, I'm Christine. I'm she, her, hers, and all my access needs are met.
Thank you, Kristen. So we'll move into agenda item number 4 then, which is the adoption of the agenda. So be it resolved to adopt the agenda as presented. Is there a mover for the motion? Matt moves the motion. Is there a seconder for the motion?
Corbett, second.
Corbett seconds. Thank you. Is there any amendments to the to the agenda? Any discussion, amendments? I'll give it a few seconds. If there are none, we'll move to a vote then. So seeking unanimous consent on the motion. All those in favor, if you dissent, please unmute your mic. All right, so seeing no opposition, the motion will carry unanimously. And we have no regrets, so wonderful, we can jump right into it. So we'll start with our discussion item 5.1, which is BIPOC committee. Now this is an agenda item that Matt brought forward. It looks like he's out of the room at the moment, so I'll just give a brief summary and I'll leave the rest to Matt. Or actually maybe, Belkis, you kind of worked on it with Matt. Maybe you want to introduce it.
Sorry, I was flipping my chicken nuggets. So I apologize. I can really hear you from my kitchen. I'm just trying to flip it. Yeah. So I thought it was important to bring this up for a discussion item. I've been working on it, and I've also been in contact with pretty much everyone who's here right now to read over it and review it and ask for advice. I've also opened it up to other board members in our other chats just to let them read over it if they had any questions or clarifications. So I know has been an updated document. I don't know if Gabe, if you want to screen share that, the recent one that I've sent you, and then
Sure.
have a look at it. I have it open on my computer right now. So pretty much I feel like that this committee pretty much, I guess, outlining what I've said at the board meeting, that I feel like this committee is needed, especially at the SFSS. There is no current working group, committee, or advisory that supports, the BIPOC community, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color. I've seen that, for myself firsthand, and dealing with a specific type of support. I feel like the SFSS needs to, we've committed ourselves to do better, and I feel like by getting this committee started that we can work towards a lot of our goals for advocacy and making sure that we're centering and prioritizing like racialized voices within the SFSS, because I know that there hasn't been a lot done. The SFSS really has relied on, the work of FNSA and SOCA and like ASA, and other groups to take that, to take on those initiatives. I feel like that's unfair sometimes because SSS hasn't really done much themselves to prioritize this. Even with like cultural competency training, I find that, before they're like, oh, like let's get the FNSA to do cultural competency training. And for some people that might be like appropriate, but putting students to do that work, I feel like is inappropriate. And I feel like this committee would really center the way that we want to see that work done in a way that doesn't cause harm, in a way that, we're able to understand, where we need to meet those needs for specific students. Being a racialized student at a university, a lot of us have different relationships with education and academia that maybe like non-students don't. For myself, bringing on like personal experience, Indigenous students have a very specific relationship with education. It's outlined in the document, and there's a lot of barriers, a lot of systemic barriers, and I want to be blunt about it. The university does not make accommodations for racialized folks here. There's, overt racism that's still occurring. There's a lot of things that, we need to be better at. And there's a lot of ways that the SFSS can ensure that they're, taking care of these issues internally, especially supporting students. It's been a long time coming. There's been, for years I've wanted to see this type of support from the SFSS, like since I've started at the FNSA. And I feel like it's time that we, take on that initiative to properly prioritize those voices that are not being heard within the SFSS. And then if you want to read over the statement that I said at the board meeting last week, I'm welcome to share that with you as well. Kind of give an overview of why I thought this committee was important. There's a specific way that I wrote out this document. It's very, for me, because I want to work with public policy and working with, when we center this type of dialogue, I feel like it's important. I've always found, or have tried to find ways to, decolonize policy and ensure that, we're able to frame it in a way that is not harmful. When we look at policy, we know that it is structured to not support, BIPOC people, because those voices aren't centered within the development of the policy. So within this terms of reference, there's a lot of things that are in here that are specific and they're important to note. And if there's other ways of wording things, I'm open to it. but I would also like to have a discussion if there's anyone who has any questions about why that's in there, or if there's anything that needs to be properly explained, just things like that. So if there's any other questions, and we can have a discussion on this.
Sure. Thank you for sharing this, Matt. I really like how it's laid out and everything. The plan right now, what I would like to do is go through it line by line, and we can have discussion around the wording and anything we want to add or change up. And Matt, you can talk about like you just said, why you included some things, and go from there. But first, Balkis, if you wanted to say something before we get started.
That was going to be my suggestion. Let's go over it line by line, please.
Sure. Shanika, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, it's more of a statement. I just want to say thank you for bringing this initiative forward to the board and for crafting the terms of reference. I did read it, and there were a few grammatical errors, so I'm glad to see that it has been revised. And just for the committee's information, SFSS has realized the need to have FNSA support, and that is why last year we spent time hiring a FNSA coordinator, and that person will be starting their role in September. So that would be a good support as well.
Awesome, thank you. Sylvia, did you want to say something as well?
I just wanted to share that this morning I attended a webinar by, and I apologize if I mispronounce her name. It is Tatilia Michelle Nahani, and she's from the Squamish Nation, and she's been doing a great deal of work on decolonizing, and we ordered the workbook, and I think it might be worth it for us to to be able to at least talk to her and see if she can do the webinar that she did this morning with us, so that she can take us through some of the not only personal but also systemic framings that she speaks of and actions that need to take place. I found it fascinating this morning, and I highly suggest it. So what I can do is I can send you all a link to her website.
Thank you, Sylvia. Matt, you would like to reply?
Yeah, no, I've worked with Michelle Nahaney and also the Nahaney family. She's been a really good point of contact for decall workshops. A lot of people bring her in around Vancouver for these types of workshops, and I feel like she would be a really good person to talk to about that, especially being from the territories and prioritizing that. So I'm glad that you're able to attend that, Sylvia. So thanks for bringing that up.
All right, so if there's no more questions, we'll get started with looking the terms of reference over. Now, Matt, I don't know how you want to do this. If you want me to read it out, or you can read it out, and as we're going along, you can just make comments about how you've laid it out. It's up to you.
You can read it out.
Sure, sounds good.
Are we able to, if there's anywhere that someone wants to stop, I don't know how we want to do that in the chat, or if we want to just unmute, if there's anything that, I guess just put the little list thing in the chat when you want to stop somewhere. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, here is what, I'm just looking through this now. What I'll do is I can read kind of paragraph by paragraph or line by line. And after each line and or paragraph, I'll just stop and we can comment about what I just read.
Okay.
Cool. So the name of the committee is BIPOC Committee, and that stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color Committee. Yes? Cool, I got that right. The duration of the committee will be established upon the adoption of these terms of reference and dissolved at the discretion of the board and proper consultation with BIPOC student groups and communities. Is there any questions or comments about that wording so far?
This is Sylvia. May I suggest that you, at the very beginning, put the full name of the committee and then you give the acronym? Like that, right off the bat, people know what BIPOC, in case some people don't know.
I was actually going to suggest the same thing. Actually spell it out at the top and then, oh, you already have the definition here, so that's perfect. Cool. Yeah, sounds good. Is there any other questions about that? Doesn't look like it. So we'll move into the purpose section. So the purpose of this committee is to ensure and prioritize the voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC, community at Simon Fraser University within the framework of the Simon Fraser Student Society, and that the lived experience of racialized folks is always considered, recognized, and acknowledged. Historically, Black, Indigenous, and people of color disproportionately face more barriers due to the constructs that have been established without BIPOC folks in mind. Academia and university settings are not indifferent to this mistreatment and misappropriation of BIPOC voices. Academia, as we know it, has been used as a tool to assimilate and indoctrinate racialized voices. This committee is to ensure that Black, Indigenous, and people of color have the ability to speak on issues that directly affect our BIPOC communities within SFU and their educational experience. This committee shall work with the board of directors and the SFSS to properly support racialized students from a BIPOC perspective. The role of this committee should be to support voice opinions and give advice to where the SFSS and SFU are lacking, and to close the gaps and barriers that racialized students face in their university experience. Asif?
I just wanted to ask, in the line where it says academia and university settings are not indifferent, is indifferent the right word that we were trying to use?
There was a term that I was trying to remember, but I can't, like, I've been pretty overloaded, so I was trying to really clean this up. If there's another term that you would, because one that I'm trying to find is that they're not,
that they're not immune to the mistreatment or misappropriation?
yeah, like they haven't, like, that's what I'm trying to convey with that. Yeah. If there's another term, can you please send it?
Cool. I would probably say that they are not immune to the mistreatment. So that means they're not, I guess, excluded, or I think maybe something along these lines.
Yeah, we'll think about that. I'm trying to think of a word too. I'll put a question mark beside that. How do I?
Exempt? They're not exempt from the mistreatment.
Oh yeah, that's good. How do people feel about that? Cool. Is there any other comments about this paragraph?
For myself, when I was writing the purpose, I thought it, like I was talking about this with Corbett earlier today. I know it's a quite like long like purpose statement, but I feel like the way we want to center this committee, we have to talk about the accountability within academia for people to understand the purpose of this committee and how it's going to be structured and how this committee is going to be working with the board. From what I've seen when we're doing this type of work, we need to center the lived experience and also the history and take accountability to properly center these voices in a good way. And also for anyone who wants to join this committee, like, 5 years or like 10 years, and if this committee is still established, I want them to be able to look back and be like, oh, okay, this is what we're doing, and it makes more sense instead of having like a really vague committee. Like I look at it problematic, like the nominating committee, and I'm trying to find, stuff, and it's like, what's its purpose? And it's like, and especially for this committee, I feel like it's going to be a really big community support in that way. So I feel that it needs to have that historical aspect and also outline some of the issues and why the establishment is important.
Thank you, Matt. All right, cool. I'm going to move on to the definitions. And we'll probably want to put something right here between this paragraph and there. Just that's like a heading that says definitions. Definitions heading. So I'll start with the first definition. BIPOC is defined as Black, Indigenous, people of color. This is an acronym that makes the distinction of racialized folks who face disproportionately more barriers than other groups due to the systemic oppression, colonization, racism, capitalism, dispossession, etc. Any comments on that line? Looks pretty good. Cool. Is my audio clear? Cool, just checking. It's been kind of weird lately. So we'll go to the next definition. Or it's not a definition, just some. The SFSS prioritizes Indigenous voices, and we acknowledge that the SFSS is located on the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Coquitlam, and Katzie nations. Balkis?
I think we should just move that to right on top of definitions, right before the definitions start.
Cool. What does everyone think of that? It makes sense to me. Move territorial acknowledgement to top. Cool. We're good on that one? Sounds good. Next one is racialized. Racialized refers to anyone who experiences racism because of their race, skin color, ethnic background, accent, or culture. Racialized people are people of color, indigenous peoples and ethnic and cultural minorities. And then you're citing something there. Okay, cool. Are the references at the bottom? Just checking. We might want to add a reference. Oops. Okay, how about that one? Balkis?
Do we need references if they're like the definitions are directly from the links of documents that you needed to know? Like at the bottom, there's links to stuff you need to know, and the definitions are there.
I'm just thinking if you're citing a website or a document, I would be hesitant to actually insert the link inside the document because links change, but citations don't. So yeah, if you know what I mean. Yeah, cool. So I'm just gonna put that there. State source. Cool. Sounds good. Cool. And Matt, just literally jump right in if you have anything to say. Like, okay. You bypass the speakers list.
Okay, there was so that's what I was wondering on, like, how to properly cite these, because I know that the I have the document at the bottom in relevant documents when we get there, but just in general, if anyone has a proper way to cite this toolkit, if this isn't correct, if someone could help me with that.
Sure. I think what citing format do we usually use? I think Chicago for things like this. Yeah, I could be wrong, but that seems like probably the best one to use. So I'm actually gonna, yeah, we'll do that later. Okay, cool. We'll move on to the next definition then. Barrier. A barrier is an overt or covert obstacle used in equity-based approaches to mean a systemic obstacle to equal opportunities or outcomes, an obstacle which must be overcome for equality to be possible. Feeling good about that? Cool, cool. So we'll move on to colonialism. Colonialism is the establishment, maintenance, acquisition, and expansion of colonies through violence in one territory by people from another territory. The way in which colonization manifests itself may vary depending on the global location. In all forms, colonialism creates an unequal relationship between the dominant colonial state and between the indigenous peoples of the colonized territory. I love that. That's good. We're good on that one. Sounds good. I'll move on. Privilege. Privileges are systemic advantages based on certain characteristics that are celebrated by society and preserved through its institutions. These can include being white, having money, being straight, not having a disability, etc. People are often unaware that these characteristics can act as privileges as they are so effectively normalized. Privilege is not earned, but is rewarded automatically based on characteristics and traits of an individual. Cool, cool. Looks like we're good on that one too. Marginalization is a process of social devaluation that serves to justify disproportional access to scarce social and material resources. It's a process that pushes a particular group or groups of people to the edge of society by not allowing them an active voice, identity, or place in it. It does this through the exclusion or isolation of people from being able to participate in political, social, and economic mainstreams that others in society who hold power and privilege can participate in. Cool. Looks good on that one. Systemic barriers refers to the systems that have been established without Pardon me, I need to read that again. Systemic barriers refer to the systems that have been established without Black, Indigenous, and people of color in mind and are often excluded. Systemic oppression refers to how the systems of our society have inherently created disadvantages to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. For example, patriarchy, sexism, heteroism, racism, ableism, militarism, and colonialism. In fact, I might put something here that says, this might be worded like including, but not limited to, et cetera, et cetera. Cool. EDI is defined as equity, diversity, and inclusion. EDI is brought forward from individuals who have lived experience, and the SFSS acknowledges, I think that should say, that there are key factors in order to properly practice EDI. And I think Sylvia has a comment.
It was just to the paragraph prior. I think one of the things that need to be included is ageism. Both ways, for those of us who are older and for those of you who are younger. It's something that it's real. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Sylvia. So, Any overarching comments around the definition section? We're looking good. So now we get into the membership of the committee. So voting members, the president is an ex officio member of the committee, as is the default for all other committees on the board as well. One board member acts as chair, or on the recommendation of the committee can be another member of the committee. At least 2 and up to 4 board members in addition to the chair. 1 member of the First Nations Student Association Board. 1 member of Students of Caribbean and African Ancestry Executive. Up to 1 counselor on the recommendation of council. And ignore the first year preferred, because I think Matt was using my first year engagement committee terms of reference as a template. So we'll just make sure to cut this out. And up to 6 BIPOC at-large members. And so that just ties into the next part, which I'll also read. The selection section, which says the selection of students at large for this committee will be prioritized to BIPOC community members. So any questions on these two sections? I'm thinking maybe in the selection section, we only mentioned student at large. Maybe we should also add in there that not just the student at large, but the chair of the committee and the board member sitting on that chair should be prioritized to BIPOC students. Of course, that depends on board to board, depending on, the people that are who are incumbent board members at the time, and depending on their lived experience as well. But that was one of my thoughts. Balkis?
I think it's worth noting, how are we prioritizing? Like, we should include, I think, in the TOR that we're going to be having self-identifiable thing to, just be able to self-identify. That's all. With a check mark or something.
Yeah, we'll think about that. Yeah, and that also, I'm trying to think. That could go on the terms of reference. It might also just be part of the application. But then how does that work for board members and the chair? Yeah, we'll give that some more thought too. Anything else on this section, these sections, membership and selection? Balkis?
You're saying how would it work for the board member and chair? It would be the same thing. Like, it could be a board member, or in that case, on the recommendation of the committee. And same thing applies, like the self-identifying.
Cool. So we'll move on to deliverables then, if that looks all good. Sounds good. So deliverables. As a board committee, this committee is to provide the board with formal recommendations and reports, including but not limited to organizing engagement initiatives and seeking results that equitably benefits BIPOC students on campus. Highlighting and educating folks on issues that I think there's a spelling error there, that affect racialized students on campus. Is affect the word you wanted to use, Matt? Or impact?
Impact.
Impact?
Yeah.
Sounds good. Support those who face barriers on campus due to systemic barriers. Supporting initiatives by BIPOC groups on campus and ensuring those groups receive proper consideration and consultation. Guide the SFSS's advocacy on behalf of BIPOC students and to ensure accountability on SFU's EDI efforts and reconciliation efforts, and that they are committed to action. on SFU's EDI efforts and reconciliation efforts, and that they are committed to action. Yeah, I like that. I think it's a bit, the words don't flow. We'll figure that out though. Another thing, I think that throughout the terms of reference, instead of saying SFU, I think we need to say the university. Yeah. So replacing SFU with the university. It's just a terminology thing. Cool. Addressing concerns and challenging institutional and overt racism at SFU. Building an anti-racist approach to training and development sessions and cultural awareness training within the SFSS and SFU. Fostering an anti-racist environment through community building events, cultural events, advocacy, and campaigns. So I'm going to zoom out on that. Any concerns about this section? Sylvia, go ahead.
I have a question about the wording may be, and it may be my headache, but we are able as a society to do things within the SFSS, and we can influence, encourage, but I don't know that SFSS can enforce cultural training on SFU. The way it reads right now, it seems to me that that's what it's saying, but I'm not certain.
Okay, Balkis, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I think the point here is it says to ensure accountability on SFU's side, because they do have this EDI initiative, and as much as we can't enforce force the university to do stuff, we can certainly advocate and hold them accountable to it and work with them on those efforts. So you're right, we can't force, but we can push as much as possible from our end to make sure that they deliver what they have promised an EDI.
Okay, so it's my headache. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you for the question and the clarification. So are we feeling good about this section? Sounds good. So we'll move on to governance. The committee will strive for consensus. Where consensus is not reached, where no consensus is reached, the committee will make decisions by simple majority vote. We also take into consideration and respect Indigenous forms of governance and recognize how often other forms of governance overrule Indigenous ways of knowing, especially on occupied stolen territories. When we take into account Indigenous forms of governance, we will consider other aspects and ways of knowledge in order to properly support this decision-making process. This can include inviting Indigenous elders of the territories and asking for advice or support in the decision-making process, finding ways to include Indigenous forms of government, i.e. talking circles, transparency process, and community engagement. A majority of voting members constitutes quorum, and Robert's Rules of Order shall govern the conduct of committee meetings. Feel good? Balkis?
Just a couple of commas to add, one after overrule Indigenous ways of knowing, comma, especially on occupied stolen territories. And then also after Indigenous forms of governments, the second last line after the word governance.
Cool.
I wanted to add something just to maybe give a little bit of clarity. I thought it was important to note this, especially in governance, because since we are on occupied stolen territory, and also me acknowledging that I'm not a member of these territories, I am an uninvited guest. I wanted to make it clear that we will do our best with this committee to respect the territories and also ask, like, if there's a decision or consultation that needs to be made from this committee, that we will make sure that we're reaching out for advice when needed to properly consult the territories, because that's something that hasn't been happening. Or if there is something that may be in disagreements and we can't strive for consensus, that we're able to utilize different ways of governance to finding, you know, what decisions that we have to make in the future. And I find that this would be a good way. It can also be like informal, and we can also work towards, you know, getting more cultural competency training on how to properly do this with proper Indigenous peoples, and taking their advice on that. So I thought that was an important thing to note.
Thank you, Matt. Another, just a small wording change, but it's very good. I think we should try to avoid using like first person pronouns. So like I noticed the word we is in there a few times. We should try and replace that with the committee will take into consideration ... when the committee, or when we take into account Indigenous forms of government. Yeah, so like, how do I get my text back? There we go. So like just here and here, trying to say the committee instead of using a first person pronoun. If that's cool, I think that's just kind of just policy jargon. Oh, sorry, Wei-Chin, did I already mention what you were gonna say?
Yeah, you that was what I wanted to say. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so we're feeling good about this. We can keep on moving. And the rest of it, I think, is just kind of not regular TOR stuff, but we'll keep going. Communications, the communication section. The committee shall meet in person or electronically as required and at the call of the chair. The committee shall report on its progress at board meetings. The committee shall set a meeting calendar for the duration of the first meeting of the term. Oh, okay. The committee shall set a meeting calendar for the duration of the academic year. I think there's a word missing there. That's okay. And the chair may call a meeting where a notice of 3 working days is provided. Looks good there. Any questions? It's fairly straightforward. We'll move into relevant policies. So the members of the committee should be familiar with the following: GP5, which is the board committee principles; GP6, which is the board committee structure; GP11, committee member appointment and resignation; and GP12, responsibilities of board committee members, as well as the SFSS issues policies. Sounds good. I wonder if maybe even something we should add under deliverables is advises the board on the implementation of issues policies or something along those lines. We'll think about the wording of that. Recommends. In relevant documents, the members of the committee should be familiar with the following. Yes, so I think which document here, is it this one, is the one that you were citing up in the other section, Matt? Cool. So we might want to add that as a citation and not a link. I'm just trying to think too, with these other documents, I'm just hesitant to put links in the terms of reference because, of course, links change, and I don't want to have a dead link in the terms of reference. So how might we work around that?
I can get actual copies of the documents and add them to this. They're kind of lengthy. That might be the only way, or even have like a doc or something that is filed with it, and just have all the PDFs of them in there.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. Balkis?
I'd also suggest we can keep the links as long as they're working, and then as soon as they're not anymore or relevant, we can either update them or remove them. But I also support the idea of including the documents as PDFs.
Awesome. Matthew?
Yeah, I thought it was important to add a lot of these documents, like the Aboriginal Reconciliation Council report from the university. Since we are at SFU, I think it's pretty valid that we look through these documents and look at the initiatives that the university is taking towards. I don't like the term reconciliation, but that's what they're trying to work towards. So I'll take that. And then that's something that we can look into to also properly support those initiatives. Because right now, I don't believe that the SFSS has like a reconciliation, like calls to action or anything that I know of or that I've heard that they're working towards right now. So that might be something to look into as well.
All right. So that concludes the terms of reference. So Michelle said this morning that it should be conciliation, just a thought. Yeah. If there's any thoughts on that. Cool. So overall, is there any other changes or additions to the document? I guess we can kind of, by consensus, I'll just ask, how is everyone feeling about it? Is this, once all the relevant changes are made that we just discussed, is it good to go to the board? I'll even just cool. Okay, I'm seeing no opposition or any further questions, so I'll take that as a yes. So what do I need to do now? Yeah, so if there isn't any further discussion on this, we'll say that this will go to the board, the next board meeting, and hopefully gets established at the board table. Cool. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. I'm going to close this. Okay, sounds good. So that wraps up 5.1. Thank you, Matt, for bringing that to the committee. We'll move on to 5.2, which is updated draft inter-director conflict policy. And I'll actually pass this over to Shanika. She knows about it. And you know, there's history and the work that was done by last year's board on it.
Hi, my net was frozen. Did you ask me to speak? Sorry.
It's okay. We're just on the inter-director conflict policy, and I thought you might be able to give a summary of that.
Sure. So this policy was introduced to the board last year, well, the governance committee early this year in January. And at that time, we had identified a need to have the policy. But I still think this policy is necessary because I've looked at other boards and they have a policy that helps directors to deal with their internal conflicts. And I believe that there's conflicts exist in all teams, especially when you have to make strategic decisions. You're going to have robust debates and you won't all agree. You won't all be on the same page all the time. And this is the reason why I'm still putting this policy forward to assist board members to deal with their internal conflicts in a healthy and professional manner, and to prevent people from resorting to resigning from the board. So this is the reason why this policy is brought to the committee. And from the last governance meeting in January, well, the previous one before last 2 weeks, in January, they had made some suggestions to update the policy, which I've incorporated in this new document. So I gave also circulated the document with the edits, and I basically brought it to this committee for your review and for your suggestions and discussion.
Cool. Sylvia, do you want to make a comment?
I was just thinking that, with the BIPOC committee just established or about to be established, if the board approves it, that perhaps, this policy could already begin having indications of some of the work that could be done. For instance, talking circles or other indigenous forms of problem solving. It could already be introduced in this policy as a way of showcasing the work that the committee might be doing.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, something to consider, definitely. So I guess I'm hoping you all had a chance to read it. I definitely looked it over. I had a chance to look it over, and I'll open up the floor to questions that anyone might have, suggestions, etc. Corbett?
Yeah, just when I was reading through it, I was just wondering what level of conflict would be necessary for this kind of policy to come into play. Like, because I'm not really sure what conflict or respect or fair or some other language means in this environment, like a heated debate versus people using profane insults, that kind of stuff. I'm just wondering what level this would be necessary for.
Balkis?
Yeah, I'm wondering there's option number 2. Where is it? The one that talks about going in camera, the conflict going in camera. I'm hesitant. I don't even think that's something we should look into doing. Like, we shouldn't do conflict solving in camera, because I do really think like stuff that needs to be resolved needs to be public discussion, and we can have that respectfully in public. It's really clear what kind of stuff goes in camera in our policies. So I don't think we should add any more barriers to transparency in that way.
Awesome. Do you want to go first, and then Shanika can?
Yeah, it was kind of a twofold comment. Part of it was that issue around in camera. Additionally, we do have policies that outline what can and cannot be handled in camera. And if I'm not mistaken, personal conflict doesn't fall under any of those categories. The second thing that I kind of took issue with, and I think I might have brought it up when the governance committee discussed it in January as well, is under option 3, it says that the parties in conflict shall contact the executive director to arrange a time to meet and discuss the issue, or to request to have an external third-party mediator to facilitate a discussion and help individuals. So my kind of concern about that is involving the executive director and conflict between board members. I don't know if that's really appropriate for a couple of reasons. A, because their executive director is so involved in what we do. And we do all have, some degree of relationship with the executive director. And secondly, when you think about the actual relationship between the board and the executive director, we essentially are it kind of becomes strange when you have the board, who are, the stewards of the society and essentially the employers, having someone that reports to them be a mediator, I don't think is appropriate.
Yeah, I think all my concerns were brought up too. I guess my question also too is option 4. Is the ombudsperson actually mandated to mediate SFSS concerns? Like, that's just my question, and it's not really an area of knowledge that I'm familiar with. And Sylvia agrees on the ED being the middle contact person part. But Shanika, sorry, you have your mic unmuted. You can go ahead.
Yeah, so first answer Corbett's question. He asked, what do we define as a conflict? So a conflict is anything that is preventing the board to do its important work or performing effectively. So it's anything that's affecting your work, affecting how you feel personally when you're in the board meeting. So, and for OSAB, you said that, for in-cameras, we can have HR issues, and although you guys are considered to be volunteers and you're the employers, it is considered to be an HR matter because you are the employers, and as employers, if you can't get along, how are you going to manage your organization? And were there any other questions that I missed? And for the ombudsperson, Gabe, the ombudsperson, you'll go to that extent if you feel like you're being personally attacked, and as an SFU student, you are free to talk to ombudsperson about anything that violates you as a person. So it's in that regard that we recommend the ombudsperson. I also do agree that we should remove the ED as the middle person, so we can definitely have a third-party mediator, and that was one of the recommendations from January, but I kept the ED just for either or.
Okay. Also, do you want to say something?
Yeah, it was a response to your previous point about the ombudsperson. So with the ombuds office, if I'm not mistaken, their job is to deal with academic issues. So that would be somebody there to help to interpret policy on behalf of students if it comes down to things like academic appeals, reports of academic dishonesty, etc. There is nothing in the ombuds job description that deals with student societies, which is independent from the university anyway. So I don't also think it's really appropriate to put that burden on the ombudsperson, because she is fantastic and I'm sure she would be willing to help, but that is not within her job description. And then my second point, I believe, what was I going to say? I lost my train of thought, so I will get back on that one.
That's okay. I think we haven't touched on the part of the option 2 about going in camera, and I think also mentioned we have policies around what we can do in camera and not. Was that one of your points? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, my point was, I'm not really sure because and please, anyone, if you have a different interpretation, correct me if I'm wrong. Human resources, at least within the context of the SFSS, is regarding the interactions between staff and then interaction between the board and staff, not the interaction between the board members who are, as Shanika mentioned, not employees of the society, but rather like volunteers or the employer. So, I mean, again, that's like an interpretation thing and how we decide to interpret the in-camera section. But I think in spirit, it's not really appropriate to spend board time and the staff's time dealing with inter-director conflict. I think it's a situation where, if there's issues, it means that people aren't following the code of conduct in the policies, and then it becomes an issue where there's a policy breach. And I think that needs to be handled differently.
My question to you is, how do you intend to solve your conflicts? Because there are going to be conflicts. It's maybe you're a different board where you're all on the same page, but what if it's a conflicting board? How do you recommend solving conflicts?
Awesome.
I mean, I don't really think it's a situation of us all being on the same page. I think it's a situation, and maybe this is a more personal view, but when you do run for student elected office, it's a responsibility to conduct yourself in a way that is respectful and a way that is, like sensible, I guess. And if that is not the case, then there's always other avenues. I know that in previous boards where there were issues of board members who were accused of sexual assault against other board members, I think when it comes to something like this, it goes way beyond, finding a mediator. But I think if it's other things that are on a much lower level, like, disagreeing or bickering, etc., I kind of take the idea of like, you kind of need to grow up and, be professional and deal with it. And if you can't do that, then it needs to, I think, maybe become a board conversation. But I don't really know about, spending society resources on getting a mediator and all that. It just kind of sits wrong with me. It seems as if we're almost wasting students' money when we can't, I guess, come to a conclusion on our own.
Yeah, I strongly agree, and that is why this policy is recommended, so you can resolve your issues within internally. And the mediator is an option, and that's why we changed it from stages to options. So it's really when you think your conflict is not being addressed appropriately, then we suggest that you get a mediator. But in terms of you're saying you don't see how a board conflict is HR matter, it is HR related because it has a trickle-down effect. So if the board can't get along, it's affecting staff work.
All right. I mean, I'm just trying to get my thoughts straight. So if someone wants to speak, go ahead. Balkis can go, and then Asif.
Asif has a direct response.
Pardon me, actually, Asif can go first, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I promise I'm not abusing the direct response function, but in terms of the HR thing with regard to it being trickled down, I think it becomes an HR matter once the board's conflict becomes an issue amongst the staff. I think before that, then it wouldn't really be considered an HR issue. So say if the board is so disjointed and dysfunctional that the staff are now suffering, and maybe there's an issue where the union needs to get involved, etc., then definitely I would consider it an HR matter. But if it's just contained within the board, I think it's different.
Sorry, Balkis.
Yeah, I zone out too sometimes. Yeah, I just want to, I guess, reiterate things that have already been shared, where it's very much the sort of thing. Board conflict is not, I don't think, should be interpreted even as HR. HR is really clear about like it's staff matters, and if it does start affecting staff, like our board, like a disjointed board, if we're really affecting staff, that's where it can be brought up as HR, and we can go in camera to discuss. But if it's just board and board conflict, it's like there is going to be debate, and we need to follow code of conflict, and I mean code of conduct, and we do have, as I said, if it's like something that's breached policies, then that's beyond us, and we would have to take that to the next level. So.
Thank you, Balkis. Matt, do you want to directly respond?
Yeah, and from my understanding, just from that comment, we, as of the board right now in our model, we don't work directly with staff. We give that to the ED, right? So I was hoping that if there's a conflict that arises, in a perfect world, no one would ever have any issues or conflict and things like that. But if it like arises like that, I feel like the board and our stance and how we work together, we're able to have those conversations, even, publicly, by showing people the proper dignity and respect, right? So that was just something I wanted to add.
Yeah, so overall, like what I'm hearing is that, and this is my opinion too, I think that, and I think Asif already summed it up perfectly, is that when you're elected to student office, it is almost a guarantee that there is going to be disagreement. And I think that is actually good, because that is what student democracy is all about. It's the exchange of idea and the competition of ideas. And when it comes to like personal issues and disagreements about board decisions or disagreement about whatever, that there doesn't necessarily need to be a policy around that. I don't think there needs to be a policy around that. I think that our code of conduct pretty much sums up what the board needs to know about, working amongst each other and how they're supposed to conduct themselves. Again, I think the only issue here that's come up is that if it begins affecting staff's ability to do their work. So maybe that's something that needs to be looked at, but I am not personally, and of course I'd love everyone else's opinion, how it's written now, I'm not comfortable recommending this to the board. But yeah, go ahead. I'd love to hear everyone's opinion on that. Corbett?
Thanks. I kept getting jumped. The only thing I was going to make a comment on is the board also has additional powers, I think through Robert's rules, about trying to conduct or how to discipline its own members to a certain extent. Things like censure, where it's like an formal or written notice and these kinds of things. So we do have additional features. It's often not necessarily known because not everyone jumps in through the governance side of, or the rules on Robert's rules and other stuff. But I think it's important for us to know those options first to see how to learn more about those. Sorry, I'm very scatterbrained right now. I got really lightheaded when the meeting started. Basically, we have some powers. We don't often know about them as a board, and we should learn about those first and maybe put that into our language and our policy language, and then revisit stuff later for additional, if we find there's additional need.
Okay. Does anyone have any more discussion on this? So the general feeling I'm getting here is that this probably isn't something that we want to move forward with. We can bring it forward later and try and figure out maybe we can fit it somewhere else. I don't think it needs to be its own standalone policy. It can maybe fit in the code of conduct somewhere, but that's the feeling I'm getting. So if there's no more discussion on this, I'd like to move forward. But I'd just like to ask, do you all want to take like a 5-minute break, stand up and use the washroom? Yeah, cool. We'll do that and we'll resume at 4:15. All right, everyone, we'll start bringing ourselves back to the meeting and we'll reconvene. Cool. I hope Corbett's still in the room. All right, so we'll return back to our discussion items, and we'll start with 5.3, which is IEC report. Now, this was brought to the board last board meeting, and we had some good discussion about it. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of time to talk about it. And I think it's normal for the governance committee to go over the IEC report after elections. So I hope all of you have had a chance to go through it. And I'd just like to have discussion around anything you found particularly interesting in the report, and anything we can take out of it this year as the policy creating committee. Of course, we can open the report, and I'll kind of just give me a moment. So I'm going to share my screen again. So I'm not going to read this line by line, but I'd like to go over some of the main themes that were addressed in the report. So the issue around vandalism was highlighted in here. A lot of posters were taken down, and a lot of candidates were accusing each other of, taking down each other's posters and everything. And the IEC is kind of just saying that there's no way to enforce that really as the Independent Electoral Commission without satisfactory evidence, and there might need to be procedures in place to tackle this. And yeah, that's there. Again, the issue of slating came up, and I think the whole thing around this is there isn't a lot of regulation around slating or any policies, anything in the bylaws that's mentioned literally nowhere. It's up to the discretion of the IEC every year about slating. So that was also outlined in the report. Also, if you want to speak about that.
Yeah, I think they also touched on it a little bit in the specific recommendations that the IEC was making. But something that I know came up a lot during the elections was the lack of definitions around different terms that were being used by the IEC in an attempt to sanction people or to give warnings and stuff like that. And it caused a lot of headache, I'm assuming, for the IEC and for the candidates as well. I think that there needs to be more specific definitions around what slating exactly means, what actions constitute as slating. And yeah, they kind of touched on it in their key issues piece when they said that there's a lot of gray area, because there was a lot of gray area. So I think that, the recommendation that do be addressed is very, very on point.
Yeah, thank you, Asad. And I think slating comes up a bit more down farther in the document, so we can look at their recommendations. And then it goes into a summary of an investigation that happened after voting period and how the IEC conducted that investigation. And sorry, my phone is ringing. I apologize if that's making noise. But again, they make policy recommendations as a result, or coming out of that investigation and making recommendations in this report. And some of the recommendations that they suggested were hiring the IEC later. They felt that hiring the IEC when they did was a bit too early and a bit too late, and impacted their ability to sufficiently do their job. And yeah, of course, you want to touch on that too.
Yeah. So I agree with I go one step further, and I think the changes made from in 2016 with elections policies, at least we've made some changes here and there since then, but it's still the core um, structure in election policies still remain. That making it the IC more ad hoc was not a good idea because it makes it so it's a lot harder. Well, if you're constantly potentially, say you have two things a year, you have a fall referendum or by-election and a spring election referendum. Having to potentially hire somebody each term, like a new group of people each term, is not easy. It's I think more risky. There's been multiple years where the IEC has been hired late for a number of different reasons. Sometimes when it was under staff interview and then recommendations versus council handling that. My recommendations actually would be more that we bring the position back to a year long like it used to be, and maybe we even look at hiring it in the summertime, so that if there is, say, a fall by-election or referendum that tend to be a lot easier to run, they're smaller historically, and that could be a good training thing for the IC in the off season if there isn't one, then we could look at giving them tasks for like elections research or working with staff around that aspect. Like there's things we could get them to do. You may even want to have some bit of an overlap between ICs where maybe the term is not 12 months but 13 months, and they have like an overlap for the outgoing IEC to work with the incoming IEC or something like that. At least the chief side of it. I don't know if you need to have 4 commissioners sitting around for the whole year, but the IEC chief probably should be a year-long position again, like it used to be. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I actually agree with you, Corbin. And that's something that I was going to bring up too. So I'm glad you brought it up. Again, another recommendation of theirs was that the current bylaws and policies are quite vague, and parts of it are out of date, and there isn't much in the policies around campaigning on social media or how that works during voting period, etc. So one of their recommendations is to bring the policies and or the bylaws up to date in that regard, so that there isn't a lot of a gray area around what candidates can and cannot do.
Sorry, Gabe, I had a question for Corbett.
Sure, go ahead.
Are you able to give us a bit of history as to why the IEC full-time position was made into a temporary position?
I wish I knew. They came out of left field from my perspective. It just kind of got suddenly, because in 2016, governance committee didn't have minutes. So I have no idea what happened in those meetings. Suddenly they came out with near the end of their term, they came out with a bunch of changes. But I think it was making it more Carver focused, because in the past, before 2016, the IC was treated more like almost like not a board position, but like that volunteer aspect, because they had stipends, and it was more about they would only get their stipends when they were doing elections work. So it wasn't like they'd been hired for a year or appointed for a year, but they weren't necessarily working for the whole year. So they weren't necessarily costing money.
Right.
So I think it was more of a combination to try to put into more of a Carver model setup or environment where staff had more involvement on specific areas of election, because before it was, I believe the IC would do a lot of the planning and running of and booking of almost everything. But I didn't understand why they changed it to a term by term potentially, like temporary position. I don't know why.
And do you know, sorry, my last question, who the IEC was the person independent of anybody from the board, from the office?
Sorry, what do you mean by independent?
As in, who did the person report where in the progress of their work, or what they were up to? Did they report to a committee?
As far as I remember reading about an old election committee a long time ago, but for about 3 years or so, I think they also then council took it over, because I think there was a concern about board influence on the elections, having a board committee.
Right.
And then council wasn't doing some problems, and then we switched over to cover model. I think during those 3 years, they mostly answered to the board. I remember them coming and presenting to the board multiple times about progress and stuff and challenges. They might have been directly talking to, say, like VP Student Services or another position, but that I never learned about that until, so I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, I'll try to figure some more information that I can bring back to you, because I mean, since I've been here, it's been a temporary position, and I didn't know that this was full-time before. So there must be some history that someone can share with us.
Yeah, I know some of the other past IEC people from that time period. I can try to reach out to them.
That'd be great, yeah. Yeah, so that we can piece together the story, right, rather than going by supposition. So yeah, okay, thank you.
Cool. And I think a big reason why I also wanted to go over this today, other than it's common for the governance committee to go over this after an election, is that concurrent with our bylaw review, I'd like to have a elections and referenda policy review as well. You know, coming out of the IEC report, there is a lot that is recommended to change, but overall, I just think, from my opinion, having read the policies and been through an election, there is a lot to change that could be changed and improved on. And one of them is how the IEC is hired and the length of their term. So, you know, in my opinion, I very much love the idea of having a year-long IEC. I'd just like to hear from the committee members what their opinion is on that, and if there's consensus among the committee members, if that's something that they're thinking as well, if Balkis wants to speak to that.
I strongly agree with the idea of having a year-long IEC, just for the sake of just allowing time for the IEC to get itself together and get itself familiar with everything. Perhaps we could even, so yeah, I also like the suggestion of having a 13-month period, because that leaves some overlap and direct contact between the IECs for any sort of training or questions or guidance. So that I think would be helpful. We could also look into having someone like external be a part of the IEC for every year, but that is just a suggestion. I'm in favor of the year-long IEC though.
Yeah, and something just to remember too, I think the IEC, members of the IEC actually have to be members in good standing of the SFSS, which means they have to be a student. So yeah, and of course that's something, if we want to consider that, something we can think about in the bylaw review. Sorry, Corbett, I know I skipped you. If you want to go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to repeat. I guess I was saying, like, yeah, I'm full in favor of doing a review on elections policies, stuff updating, changing definition or improving definitions. Some of the things will have to also involve bylaw changes, or not changes. Like we'll have to review. That would be, it's a core aspect, and so we have to look at stuff like certain things like removing the poster size limitations, things like that, like implementation rules probably aren't, I don't believe, are necessary in the bylaws. But then we can also use that opportunity to reinforce certain ideas and values and restrictions that we think are important within the SFS's elections, core aspects of them. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm happy for that.
Another thing that just popped into my head is that, and this is a strange one, but maybe a harsh reality, is that we might have to prepare to have our elections online, because who knows what's going to happen with the spring semester. We're getting very strong signals that spring might be online too, which means students won't be on campus and it's going to be a very different election. So we might, going through the elections rules, have to keep that at the forefront of all the policy changes that we make. I don't think there was anyone else on the list. No? Okay. And I think the rest of the concern around involvement of board members in campaigning, updating the infraction schedule. I think there was a concern around fines not really being applicable because there's no way to actually enforce them. And there should be a revision of the infraction, the tiers of that. Asad?
Can we actually go back and touch on the piece that you passed regarding the involvement of board members in campaigning?
Sure.
Yeah, I wanted to make a quick comment on that. And in that recommendation that, says that current board members are prohibited from acting as campaign managers. They think that the rules should be modified to limit participation of current board members in campaigning, et cetera, et cetera. I think that came up kind of this year, and I think that this is not a good recommendation in that, board members are indeed still members of the society. Even outgoing ones, there are some board members who, choose to run for re-election as well. So like, if you're saying there's some inherent benefit of being a board member, and there is, there's no denying that, would it be a situation where we would ban board members from even rerunning? Because I don't think that can be done. That would be probably a violation of like a lot of things probably. So I wanted to touch on that, and I think that would be an important part to go through, and then recommendations for regarding slaves. I think it's going to be one for a lot of conversation as well.
Yeah. And yeah, I agree with you, Asif. And I think that they are members of the society too, and are entitled and have a right to campaign on behalf of members, as long as it's not using society resources. That's a big thing. I think the IC this year had concerns around board members using society resources to give certain candidates advantages. I don't think that that's necessarily accurate. I think that's just a notion that maybe the IEC had. Corbett, you're on speakers list.
Yeah, I was going to say, as far as I know, this is actually a pretty common thing that happens. Not this election, but the previous election, when the outgoing board members was a campaign manager for one group. It's pretty common, but because board members tend to be the most knowledgeable, engaged, they tend to either help out or encourage candidates to run, or sometimes give them advice or help them out a little bit on the campaign. We don't have any official policies on campaign managers like UVic Student Society does, or some of these other groups. So we can explore that if we want to formalize things or codify some stuff or not. It's definitely a discussion we should have. But yeah, in our bylaws, it literally says members can campaign for or on behalf of candidates, and board members are still members, candidates are also members. So that's my concern about, like, we can't actually ban slating, because from my perspective, our bylaws allow it by its very nature, because the slate is not just a color scheme or a name. It's groups that want groups of candidates that want each other to win. And so I remember during the start of the campaign, I kind of filed a complaint about that, about the regulations, but that's something we have to have a discussion on. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any more discussion on this recommendation by the IEC report before we move on? No. So recommendation 6 is update infractions schedule. So this is just talking about how the 3 steps in giving warnings to candidates. The first step is a warning, the second step is a fine, and the third step is a disqualification. And their concern is that that a fine isn't really relevant or can't be enforced, and there aren't really any guidelines around how the IEC can enforce this infraction, progressive disciplinary measures. So they recommend finding another form of discipline or create a system that would require candidates to pay fines. So we can have a discussion around that, Corbett.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was still unmuted. Yeah, this has been an ongoing issue for pretty much every single IEC, because I believe that we can't necessarily, it's hard to enforce fines beyond the reimbursement limit, because I think from talking with past IECs, SFE won't like fine people on our behalf through the Go SFE portal. So I've seen some IECs where they try to do more strict rules for getting disqualified, or 1 year they tried to enforce the no non-SFS members endorsements by kind of penalizing the people receiving the endorsements in some way. And so I know there's been attempts to be creative and try to come up with solutions to enforce these rules, but it's getting harder and harder every single year. Like, it was probably a lot easier when it was literally just posters and flyers and banners in physical media, in physical places where you can go around and look at stuff. But with social media, with all the stuff, it's getting harder and harder. And I've seen some student societies, I think Ryerson or some other ones, that they have like a point system, like an infraction point system, and if you get too many points, you get disqualified or something like that. We can explore other student society models for the elections and see if there's something we can learn from.
Gabe, you're muted, but maybe you're calling on me.
I was, sorry, I didn't realize I was muted.
No problem. Yeah, I think Corbett kind of covered what I was gonna say, but I was just gonna note that even if it's difficult to enforce fines, I remember going on the elections like Facebook page of another student society. I can't remember which one it was, but what they would do, or at least what the IEC would do upon each infraction that a candidate would get, they actually publicly posted it after, reviewing the complaint and then verifying that it did warrant a warning. They would actually make it public. And then sometimes they would like sanction the students within the campaigns and say like, okay, your punishment for this is going to be that you can't campaign for the day, or you can't campaign for a couple of days. So I'm sure there are pros and cons to that kind of system as well, but I thought it was interesting. And that it kind of goes to show that maybe fines are not the only or the best way. Because to be honest, I think a monetary fine or infraction anyway kind of is unfortunate, because there are students who maybe his financial position is not the best, and I don't think that should discourage them from running in an election. I think there are different ways that we can, I guess, make sure that people are following the rules, and sometimes having a situation where it's a little more transparent and you can know why this person was fined or why this person was given a warning or a violation. It also helps to inform the voters, I think, to some extent.
Thank you, also. Is there any further discussion on this recommendation? Any thoughts? Recommendation number 7 is to host 2 debates, because there was a large amount of candidates this year. I think 48 candidates is actually the record for amount of candidates in the SFSS election. Of course, please don't cite me. I don't know if that's correct, but the concern is just it's realistically too difficult to hold a debate with that many candidates, and it was very rushed, of course. So I don't know who was first. So, Corbett, sorry.
Yeah, I think I talked about this at the board meeting, but yeah, we used to actually run 4 debates for a number of years, and the first one was in Vancouver. It was usually often within the first few days of the campaign period starting because of timeline. And then one in Surrey, and then the last one was usually close to the voting day as possible. It would be 2 in Burnaby, 1 for at large and faculty reps, and then another one for execs only, because often they just ran long. Especially the exec side and the presidential debates often was super long. And then over the years, they've kind of been cut out, and there's been practical reasons. Vancouver, almost nobody would ever attend other than a few candidates and maybe not even their friends sometimes. Surrey, we would have it set out in the mezzanine, and most students would be walking past. Some would sit down and watch, but it was again mostly just candidates from attending, and Burnaby was a little bit better for attendance for students and candidates, or usually was the best attended one. I feel that the reduction in number of debates was partially because of workload and timing challenges, but it also was valuable training in a way for candidates, especially that Vancouver or the Surrey debate was always a good practice test to figure out what the kind of questions you might get asked from your opponents or for yourself. But yeah, over time, the debates have become shorter and shorter and shorter and faster. And I feel that's kind of been more of an issue of the whole changes to the election rules in 2016 that just kind of, the goal I think was to try to have a more fixed timeline and have more for accountability. And I agree with that, but I really seriously think we need to really relook at how we're doing the elections and what the time we're doing them, because it feels that we can't expect students to engage heavily and take the time to go through the campaign materials and stuff if it feels like the election itself feels rushed at times.
Yeah, and Shanika's just saying that she thinks that the option of having live stream for the other campuses is good, but we should definitely have more than one debate given the increase in candidates over the years. Is there any other discussion on this recommendation? Yes, please indoors. I've never been so cold in my life. Okay, cool. And hosting, pardon me, and hosting more candidate orientations. There were only 2 candidate orientations this year, and many people were unable to attend due to scheduling conflicts. And the IC had to spend a lot of time and energy coordinating alternate meetings, which, according to the IC, was a lot of time and energy wasted. So the recommendation is that the Society hosts at least 3 candidate orientation meetings during the nomination period, and that this will provide candidates with more options to attend and increase the probability that every candidate will be able to attend a scheduled meeting. So yeah, this one seems fairly fair to me. I would also love to see if there are alternative ways to holding orientation other than having to be in person. Well, obviously online, classes may be online in the spring, so we don't know actually what's going to happen, but I'd like to look for alternatives because I don't know if requiring you to attend a candidate orientation is necessarily accessible to people who might have difficulty trying to attend orientations. Asa, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so with the issue of candidate orientation, I do agree with the recommendation that they make about having more candidate orientations during the nomination period. I think that having them at the nomination period came as a disadvantage to the people who had to attend later, especially because there was only that 1 or 2 days budgeted initially, and then a lot of candidates I think were not able to find an appropriate time. And then secondly, the other issue is that people aren't able to actually run, or until they're verified as a candidate, they're not actually allowed to start campaigning, which is also a disadvantage. And third, we aren't able to provide the membership with the list of candidates, which is important for posting in the peak and important for posting on social media and all of that, I think right as soon as campaign period starts. I think this election, there was a lot of issues with delay and all that. And I know this is kind of off topic, but I think that there should be a hard and fast deadline for submission of platforms and submission of the candidate nomination packages and all of that, and to leave less wiggle room, as I think there was a lot of that this year.
Keys?
I also agree with having hard deadlines for stuff because there definitely is that disadvantage if you don't attend an orientation because some life circumstance, you're at an immediate disadvantage. So definitely getting the board orientations done before campaign period is one suggestion I agree with, as well as I lost my train of thought, but okay, that's all for now.
That's okay. It is getting kind of late on a Thursday. Yeah, so just trying to, I think something that needs to be implemented is better deadlines for things like orientation, hosting more orientations, and yeah, what's already been said. Is there any more discussion on this recommendation? Cool.
Yes. Pardon my ignorance. Gabe, you were saying something where the IEC commission has to be a student.
Mm-hmm.
So based on this report, would you be open to having an external third-party person being there temporary?
Can I jump in?
Sure.
I think until we change bylaws that we're not really allowed to. Like the IC has to be students, like full, the commissioner and the chief.
Sure. I just want to know if you guys would be open to the idea, rather than, because I know some students are even afraid of applying for the position. Well, that's a problem we had this year because they feel threatened by other candidates. So I just want to get a feel of how you feel about that idea.
Personally, I don't know if I can respond to that yet. I think that's something we need to think about and have a further discussion, a conversation that needs to be ongoing. But that's just my opinion. Balkis can go first, and then Corbett can follow.
I just was wondering you said students are feeling threatened by other candidates? Like what?
The IT commissioner and they were saying, well, first of all, we didn't get a lot of applications, and that's one of the reasons why they don't want to take on such a risky role. And the commissioner themselves were saying they think they were overruled because they are a student.
Corbett, do you want to go?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm a strong supporter of students being involved in almost every aspect for the selecting their boards. So I'm more into if external in the sense of training for an IEC to be more effective, more organized. I'm more in favor of that. Also, if we do change the IEC hire date, like if it's way out of election season and it's more viewed as like a longer term commitment, that might definitely reduce the idea of feeling like intimidated or threatened from even applying for the job, because you're in there for much longer.
Okay, thanks.
We're good on this one. Never mind, Balkis.
I know Shanika mentioned that the IEC was overruled, but I'm kind of confused as to how, because the IEC is...
Well, they were saying they felt like they didn't have a voice, so even to just like talk to candidates, they were afraid.
Well, the IEC does have... Like, I understand we need to...
They are aware of the powers that they have, but they somehow feel like being in classes and so on, because they're a student, it would have affected them negatively. And I can't speak for them. I'm just saying the feedback that we got was more on that line.
Okay. I'm going to finish what I was trying to say, but I understand that we need to put in more clarity and structure and guidelines within our bylaws, and that's going to be part of our review, like governance review. But ultimately, it is student run, and Yeah, it's like it's on us to put those protections for them, but ultimately it is IEC calling the shots for things. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks.
Cool. Asad?
I was going to say something that I am not really in favor of the idea of hiring an external IEC. But I think that something worth noting would be that perhaps, I know it wasn't an issue this year, but it has been issues in previous years of appointing ex-board members as IEC commissioners or IEC chief. I know it's happened at least, well, I mean, not this last election, but the one before that, the chief commissioner was a board member. I think in a number of years before that, there were board members, like other board members who were on the commission who had even very recently been board members or the other way around. So I think we should have some kind of policy banning that if you were on the board, you're just not allowed to be the chief commissioner. I think your involvement is much too.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm actually quite shocked that hasn't been a rule already. Are we good on this? I think we've kind of gone slightly off topic, but that's okay. We'll move into the final thoughts. So what does it say here? I can read this out. So the final thoughts of the IEC was just that they said that having no prior experience with SFSS elections, they came out of this position with fresh eyes and soon became aware of excessive loopholes and gray areas that exist in the governing documents. And they did their best with the current situation to try and guide their decisions. And that the IEC is governed by the same bylaws and policies as the candidates. And for some reason, their authority and decisions they make are limited to the written bylaws and policies. The current governing documents are vague and outdated. I'm quoting the IEC report here. I strongly encourage the society to make efforts toward editing and adapting these documents based on the recommendations provided in this report. The IEC is placed in a position where they are given immense responsibility with little guidance and little support due to the independent nature of the commission. In order to move forward with fair and clean elections, pardon me, it is imperative that the governing documents are improved and to address recurring issues, pardon me. This will allow the IEC to properly analyze and apply the bylaws and policies as needed without having to struggle to draft their own regulations to fill in the blanks. I hope that the issues raised in this report are reviewed and taken into consideration to improve the electoral process in future years. And this was Allison, this year's IEC Chief Commissioner. So any concluding thoughts? No? Okay, I think we do have more discussion items on the Governance Committee agenda today, so we're kind of running over time here, so I think it would be wise to move on. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So I am going to move on to 5.4, which is governance restructuring. And so since the last governance committee meeting, a lot's kind of happened. There is no new draft of policies because what happened was last governance committee, there was a kind of a very rough draft of a policy manual that could be recommended to the board in the future, but it was just taking out very outdated things that weren't necessarily relevant, things that conflicted with the bylaws or the collective agreement or other things. And what should happen now is that today we need to have a discussion around the governing model that we would like to use. And you know, Corbett and I and other members of the governance committee have done some research on governance models that other student societies have used, alongside a briefing note that Sarah compiled for us. As well, over the last week, we had a meeting with Sarah around keeping certain parts of the current policies. That was mostly around the GPs, the governing policies in the current policy manual. And then we also had a separate meeting with Shibangi, and she went over the administrative policies portion of the 2015 policy manual. And if we're kind of moving back toward those administrative policies, what might conflict with a collective agreement, JDs, or other governing documents that we just need to be aware of as we're going through this this restructuring. So I guess right now, what should happen is I'd like to have a discussion around governance models with reference to any of the research we've done, and any of the research that Sarah compiled for us in her briefing note. So I'll open the floor up for that. Corbett?
Yeah, okay, thanks, Gabe. So yeah, I was reading through the briefing note by Sarah. Quite a bit of stuff I've read similarly to, like, because so the briefing note covers the background, different board governance models, and which is nothing, and then some profiles of different student societies, as well as some key considerations. The categorizing is, I've seen similar stuff before, though I don't fully agree with there's grouping of certain things. Like working board and a board like a management board or administrative board, I don't think are necessarily always the same thing. There's differences, mostly in the sense of like what does the board do in its work. There's also a lot of overlap and because of hybrids and stuff. So like a governance model, not policy governance, but a governance model focus a lot on policy with some administrative oversight and stuff. They might have an executive director or senior managers, they might not. So my main concerns with the briefing note was some of the groupings of some of the student size that I've also reviewed as being policy governance hybrids, but not 100% sure I agree with that. Like, sure, there's certain shared language around certain things, but for the most part, looking back at the SFS's history and the way as I understand it, with the different governance models we had, we've started out definitely as a working board. We have had periods in the 70s, 80s, and stuff where we've had various administrative roles or none at all. And we've also made often between a level of administrative board or a policy board or a working board. The changes, so the 2000 and I'd say from 2013 to 2015 or so, that was the board tried to be more of a policy board. But again, the same kind of issues I've seen through multiple reviews and restructurings from like 2006 reports I've read, 2013 and stuff, that a lot of times they would make these changes, but then the board itself would still kind of be doing the same thing. They'd still be heavily involved in the committees. They'd be, and that held true even with Carver model and changed in 2015. And so my argument is ultimately that if our environment is going to be where our students are coming in, they're all coming often from student unions and clubs and other groups that are very much the working board style. We need to kind of respect that because we'll keep hitting the wall. But we also can't be a full working board because that's way too much work. We don't have the skill sets. And so my perspective is that we need to create some kind of policy administrative hybrid model that has students involved, sports members involved in some areas of the organization, just like we've always kind of have been, but that we still clearly delegate specific areas that we as students will probably never be good at. So like some of the HR aspects, some of the, like making sure payroll happens, making sure like building, major projects, that kind of stuff has to have specialized support. But that's the accountability aspects of a board that, we are elected by our members very clearly in the Size Act. We are, required to manage the society or oversee that management. That we need to have a model that seats us in that role better. And so that's where I'm moving towards, and and it's not an uncommon model in student size either. Like even looking at some examples that Sarah gave, a lot of them still have they answer to either a student council, or there's different layers from like executives handle certain things, board handles other things, their constituency groups handle other stuff. So it's more about, so to me, it's just, we don't need to reinvent the wheel in many ways, I think.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I would definitely like to second what Corbett is saying, and I know that, I've been following up with this review and keeping an eye on. I think the direction that we're going to be moving in will be something like Corbett described, in which it's a hybrid model between having more governance, a focus board, and then having something where some of the delegation of operational responsibilities will go to the executive committee. And I think a lot of student societies, I did read over Sarah's briefing note, and I think some of the same concerns that Corbett outlined I do have as well, and that, something that's a little more of a hybrid is actually not that uncommon among student societies, and that we should, I think, have our hands a little bit more involved in things like hiring. So when that comes to non-union and excluded personnel, the board should be the one doing that kind of thing. So some of those operational stuff that we have delegated to the executive director right now, I think should be done by the board, in all honesty. And that, I think this is probably what's going to be coming to the board, if I'm not mistaken. And I know that the folks on the governance committee, Gabe and Corbett, can probably touch on that a little bit more. I know Corbett has already said his piece, but...
Sorry, I was trying to speak again and my mic was muted. Yeah, go ahead, Corbett.
Yeah, I'm still a little lightheaded, so if I came across really like wishy-washy, I didn't mean to. I'm just still a little dizzy. Yeah, I just kind of back with Asab. I think this is the move we need to go to. It fits our environment, it fits our history better, and I'm in favor of it.
Cool, thank you. I guess I would also like to speak in agreement with Corbett said. I think that after a lot of research and comparing a lot of models, this is the one I think that really suits a student society the best. And it's not uncommon among student societies. And it's a perfect hybrid where the execs still, or pardon me, the board has oversight in operations, not all of it, but enough that we are able to do our fiduciary duty to manage the student society, and whether that's through delegated authority, through committees, the executive committee, some kind of HR committee. There is, I'd speak in agreement that this is the model that I would like to move forward to. And I think that this is probably what's going to go to the board next week. If it's the consensus of the committee, I'd just love to go through the rest of the committee members and hear thoughts and discussion. Go ahead, Asab.
I think it might be beneficial to go through some of the documents that we are going to be bringing to the board on Friday, as we did say that we would be bringing the results of our review, and then making sure that through the committee we do have consensus, because it does have to be a report from the governance committee. So, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, I can screen share it from my computer, and we can go through it a little bit.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, let me figure out how to do that. My computer is incredibly laggy, so And I also have a million tabs open, so if you see anything, then don't say anything. Yes, and we'll be submitting this for the minutes as well. And that will help us ensure that the rest of the board does have ample time to review. Okay, cool. I think I'm ready. Just make sure. Okay, are you guys seeing it? My screen?
Yes.
Okay, let me make sure I'm not opening the wrong thing. Okay, cool. So I know this is something that, you know, I've been working on with the governance committee. So Gabe and Corbett have been very much involved in going through this, and I can take a little bit of time just to walk through it. So the report of the governance committee, I think, essentially needs to have a thorough explanation of the model review that we have done, and specifically making sure that the model that we do choose to go with does follow the different values that we did outline in our strategic plan, which includes equity, community empowerment, integrity, sustainability, and accountability. So essentially, the goal of this was to recommend a new governance model for the SFSS that does follow these specific values. So when we did our model review, there were a few key ones that we did specifically look over. One of which was having a purely working board, having an administrative board, and then having a policy-making board and exec managed hybrid, and then a purely policy governance board. So I'm going to start from the top and give a brief overview of what each of these would look like, based on the research that we did do of the different student societies, and then also looking at the briefing note that Sarah did prepare about the different governance models. So I think, so with the working board, that was something that was in, I believe, the early 2010s, more in use, in which the board members actually directly took on the role of staff and administration, and they were the ones who carried out the organizational ends and means. So this one is very common in a lot of nonprofits, and yeah, like it says, including the SFSS in its early years. You know, you had positions like the internal relations officer, which was basically an HR person. So all of that was done by students, and it was essentially a student society run purely by students. So I think with that, some of the values that it does tie in with are accountability, because literally every decision being made was simply done by the board. The board couldn't really fall back on, you know, that it was staff who did it, which of course I don't think we should be doing now anyway. But essentially we were ultimately accountable for every action, and it was quite transparent because it was very clear who was in charge of the organization. Everybody was student facing, as is the nature of a board role, and that the board members would be the ones acting as staff managers and the stewards of the society as well. So a lot of those management, essentially all those management tasks were divvied up through the executive committee. And so they would actually direct other board members in helping to carry out the purposes of the organization. And there were very few, if any, non-board administrative roles. I believe there was an executive director. However, I believe that was it, and it was more of a guidance role to the board than anything. And then staff roles, there would be few, if any, dedicated staff roles. Strengths in relation to the SFSS, and this is something that we'll flesh out a little bit as well, is that the cost was quite different, so it did save a lot in terms of administrative costs. Board members still were paid stipends, and I know it was done a bit differently, in which board members were paid on more of an hourly basis rather than just and I'm sorry if somebody's making comments, I can't actually see your comments, so please just speak up and interrupt me.
It's just someone put themselves on the speakers list.
Yeah.
Okay. Corbett, if you had something, you can just go ahead and say it. I'm not chairing this meeting.
Yeah, no, that's okay. If Corbett wants to make a comment, he can go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to talk about the working board aspect with, like, it's hard to tell because of like what happened, say, in the 70s, 80s or so. I've gone through like peak articles for fun of it and seen the odd comments about like a business manager or operations manager or that kind of language from time to time. I know 2001, one of the AGM reports talked about changes they made because there were some financial challenges where they made some administrative changes. And I think it was only until, and then in I think around 2011 or so, that they created a senior operational advisor or organizational advisor from a person who was Colleen. She was apparently she was like a financial coordinator for a number of years, and then she moved into this additional role, and she was kind of an advisor all the way up officially until 2013, when that board made some bylaw changes and created the executive director position, and she took it over and worked on that until she retired in 2015. So there's been, definitely periods where there's definitely been administrative support, and some years that hasn't been. It's not always 100% clear because of how the SFS doesn't always do the best record keeping. So it seems that we've alternated between two different models quite often.
Thanks, Corbett. And I hope I'm okay to continue.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and Corbett, if you want to jump in with some of the more details and historical cases, please feel free to just interrupt me. Yeah, so strengths and weaknesses. So the strengths, I think, would be in staff costs. I think another strength would be in that board members were very deeply and very intimately involved in all goings on of the organization. So there wasn't any interruption, I think, of knowledge between the board members and the staff. And in terms of weaknesses, I think it actually took away a lot of time from board members. And even though, those are things that board members were able to do, it took a lot of, I guess, waste. It took a lot of time out of this membership engagement piece of being a board member, which I think is very important as well. So the second model that we kind of went over, would be more of an administrative board. So the model description is that the board of directors act as the main manager of the organization, and the main focus of the board would be on policy development and delegating tasks to staff. So it does also fit the value of accountability, because the board would still be responsible for activities and the results of the staff, and all policies would go through the board. So the board would be the ones to pass even operational policies, personnel policies, etc., that currently our board doesn't have any access to. And the board would still be focusing on policy review and development, as well as the direction and stewardship of the society, similar-ish to what we have now. And then the role of the exec, however, is a little bit different with this than what we have currently, as the exec would still act as the management of the society, and they would still be the ones delegating tasks. However, there would be very little, if no, support from admin, and it would be the administration would more be focused on specialized area that board might not consistently have the skills to oversee. And then staff, so that's not including the excluded staff. They would be the ones to carry out some of the purposes of the society as directed by the board executives, or whatever we delegated to be sought through the administrative personnel. And one of the big strengths of this one is that there was a much closer tie between the board and the unionized staff. I think some of the issues that we have right now can be attributed to, I think, a lack of connection between us and the unionized staff. A lot of the times, we don't interact with them as per the policy governance model. Currently, everything goes through the executive director, essentially, and the executive director is looped in on all communications between the board members and all staff. However, the weakness is that it kind of opens us up to more possibilities for grievances, especially if you do have a situation where you've got a board that are a little too assertive with the unionized staff, and exec who maybe are not that well versed in staff relations may be more prone to making some mistakes. So I think that is an area for some support, which would be important as well, I think, in any model that we choose to take up. Damn, I'm talking fast. Sorry if I'm kind of out of breath. So the third one, which I think is something that, I think, well, it is the one I think that we're looking to adopt, is a hybrid between a policymaking board and then an exec manager board, in which the executive committee does take up some of the responsibility management. And the description of the model would be that it is pretty similar to an administrative board. However, there would be more clear definitions between the actual board roles and responsibilities, and there would be more support from administration, essentially. So I think it fits the value of accountability as well, because the board is still responsible for the activities and the results of staff and the policies, which would all still go through the board, and also transparency in community. So any ops changes would have to go through the board at board meetings. All ops changes would have to be passed at the board meeting by a board motion, and the exec would be the ones who report on operations, and they would get support from excluded staff to make that happen. So, you know, instead of like with a working board where you have an IRO for staff relations, you would probably still have an administrator to be there to support you in that way. And I think that would help alleviate the concerns of, you know, grievances that might come up with inexperienced board members in that area. So the board's role in this kind of structure would be to focus on policy review and development, as well as the direction of the society, which is somewhat what we do right now. However, currently the board is not involved in the policy review of any operations policy, so that would be different. And then the exec role would be to be essentially oversight body and a management body of the society. And the administrator's roles would be to deal more with the day-to-day stuff that I think the admins deal with right now in terms of staff relations. And it would be a support role to the exec committee in their management tasks. And then the staff role, so the included or unionized staff role, they would be there to carry out the purposes of the society as directed by the board and executive or administrative personnel, and they'll be the ones who work on the committees outlined in the operational policies, which does happen to some extent already. You know, we've got like the events committee, and we've got an events coordinator who does work directly with the committee. So I think it would clear up some of the confusion there. And then they would still have an input and reflective of, it would be a more cooperative workplace environment, I believe. So I think some of the benefits of this kind of model would also be the cost savings, because I think there would be a much decreased need for administrative support to the board, as the board executives would be taking on some of that responsibility. And I think in terms of weaknesses, it might be a bit of a learning curve for the execs to pick up on some of those management roles. However, I don't think that that is a weakness that's strong enough to deter us from going to it, as I think the benefits of having a more cooperative workplace, the cost savings, and having the board be a little more intimately involved with the operations of the society really, I think, overrides the weaknesses that I think that we can learn to accommodate. All right, so the last one that we went through, and the one that our board technically has adopted right now, is a policy governance board, in which our responsibility lies in developing and reviewing policies for administration and staff to follow, and long-term strategic planning, like we did last year and like we reviewed this year in terms of our strategic plan, and then acting as an oversight body by requesting and reviewing reports through the executive director. So in terms of value fit, it is still an avenue for a good amount of accountability as a board. I think whatever model that we do take on, the board is still technically responsible for their activities and results of the staff and the policies they pass. And it also does count for a lot of transparency and community, because the operational changes do still have to go out to the board at board meetings, and that they do have to be passed, and that they report on the operations, and they do get support from excluded staff. As of right now, in terms of operational changes, so if there were any major changes that did happen, the board, I think, would still have to be involved in that. However, in terms of policy setting, that is currently something that a policy governance board, or at least the way that we've set it up, it doesn't actually go straight to the board, which I think is an area of I think that's a missing link that really needs to be touched on. And the board's role in this kind of policy governance setting is that we only focus ourselves on setting the strategic direction, and that, setting policies as executive limitations and board management delegations subject to monitoring and review, focusing on a lot of reporting operational decisions and documents are internal. So with the executive limitations, rather than setting up what the executive or administrators are able to do, we essentially just outline what they cannot do and leave it up to their discretion. And then our job essentially is to be an oversight. So the way that we do have it set up right now is that the executive director is the one who reports to the board, but all other management report to the executive director. And then those managers do have different excluded staff under their portfolios, not excluded staff, unionized staff under their portfolios who do report to them, report back to them. So I think that does leave a little bit to be desired in terms of connection between the board and the staff that do not report to them. It is supposed to be focused on a lot of reporting. So I think an issue that we did talk about before was that inexperienced board members often don't know what they should be asking for in terms of reports. And I think in the last year, not including financial reporting, which I don't quite remember, the only report that we did request and receive was the operational report at the very end of the year, literally the day before our board term ended. So I think that that would be, that doesn't say to me that we were doing our job properly in terms of requesting reports. And I think that that goes to show that perhaps a model in which board members are more directly involved in operations would be a little more appropriate in that way. And that the board's role specifically is on setting the strategic direction. That's something that I think still needs to happen and would happen with any of these different admin structures, or governance structures rather. And that here the executive role would be that we meet on an ad hoc basis when board can't meet. That's kind of what goes on. Currently, the executive committee doesn't have any additional power. And usually the executive committee meets to discuss more, I guess, detailed things currently than the board might be able to on a bi-weekly basis. But essentially the executive committee does not have any different delegation of tasks than do the rest of the board. So essentially all that is just left up to the administrators. The admin, they take on all operations of the board and are led by the ED, and that the staff takes full direction from the ED and then other administrative staff under them. So some strength under this one is that there's only one point of accountability on the staff side, so that makes it a bit easier on the board members to, only connect with the executive director. And there is a lot less opportunity for grievances against board members. I don't know exactly. However, I don't think any grievances came to the board in the last year, which of course is a good thing. But I think some of the weaknesses include that there isn't a lot of transparency around operational decisions, and there's a big gap between the actual unionized staff and the board, in which we actually do not really interact with them, and that all interactions with the unionized staff, if we were following the policy governance model properly, there would be little to no interaction with unionized staff. But I think we've opened ourselves up to a situation where sometimes it doesn't make sense to have a middleman in certain situations, but at the same time we do also want to respect whatever we did choose to take on. So give me 10 seconds to catch my breath. This is a lot of reading.
That was really well done. Also, thanks for that breakdown. You definitely summarized that more eloquently than I could have.
No worries. So I think the main so the recommendation that we will be bringing to the board will be the governance and execs manager hybrid. So it is similar to some student societies, and the board will essentially be the ones who outline the limits of operations of the student societies, and the management is delegated to the executive committee. So we would still have some non-union excluded personnel, or perhaps one or two, depending on what specific tasks that we do decide to delegate to them. And more detail about that will be coming through the executive committee's review, and that they will be the ones who assist with the day-to-day operational aspects of staff relations. However, the ones that we find benefit in the board actually being involved in will be delegated to the executive committee in different aspects. So the reporting relationship should be clear. They will report to this president, and the president alongside an HR committee, which is, I think maybe Corbett can touch on this because I know there has been HR committees of the board before. They would essentially make sure that the excluded staff are reviewed, that we are receiving reports for them, and making sure that we are satisfied with their performance. And budget changes and stuff will go through the finance committee, and all operational decisions outside of the scope of what's written in policy will go to the executive committee. And that all relationships, including reporting relationships, tasks, delegation, will all be outlined in the policies. So the two policies that we are bringing to the board essentially will be the board policies, which we do have standing right now, but we'll definitely be going through some significant changes, and administrative policies. So within the board policies, that'll be rules, standing orders, that essentially stipulate all the work of the board in relation to board members and the committees, the roles of the board, the roles of the board members, and how they are remunerated, and how society policies are changed. And then on the other hand, the administrative policies, which are similar. However, they'll outline things like finance policies, communication, staff relations, internal access, member services, how they're run, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of the stuff that is included in the operational policies that we still see value in having as a separate document. So that is essentially it. I'm sure Gabe and Corbett might want to touch on it a little bit more, and we will be giving a much more thorough review to the board as we do consider this as well. However, I think that there's value in seeking consensus from the governance committee right now on the model that we are taking on, so that we do have ample time for all board members to actually go through this and then come prepared with questions on Friday. Yeah, I'm gonna stop screen sharing.
Yeah, so thank you, Asif, for that, the breakdown. Yeah, I am very satisfied with the breakdown that document outlines, and I think that with this model, it is really the best one that will suit our needs, and I think that this is the one that we should move forward with. So this is my agreement, and Corbett can go next if he wants to say something.
Yeah, and because it's a hybrid, it's in many ways it's similar to what we're doing right now in some of our kind of how we work day to day, like. And so I think a transition would not be that hard, or relatively, compared to say like wanting to go say working board model. So it's more about just clarifying roles and delegations and so sorry, I got distracted. So yeah, it won't be it'll be an easier transition than any other models that we've seen. Yeah, that's all I'll say for now.
Thank you, Corbett. Keith?
Yeah, I just want to also voice my support for this hybrid model, where I think it breaks things down really. It makes things really clear in terms of who's reporting to who, and where senior staff reports to executive, and the management in general is to support the work of the board. And I think it's really appropriate and works for us, where operations are outlined through policies. So I'm glad with this. I'm happy to move forward with recommending this to the board based on our review.
Thanks, Balky. Sorry, I'm just having a bit of problems with my headphones. So Asif can go next while I try and fix this.
Yeah, and I just wanted to speak in agreement with what Corbett said, in that, when we do adopt this at the approval of the board, it will be, I think, a fairly easy transition, in that the executive members will take a bit of time to pick up on the new tasks that are delegated to them. However, I think it will really help to solve the issue of continuity in terms of operations, what's going on with coordinators, what's going on with essentially what's going on in member services. That has been a big issue, I think, in recent years. So I'm looking forward to adopting this, of course, at the approval of the board and the consensus of the governance committee. And this, of course, is happening in tandem with the administrative restructuring as well. So it'll make sure that the recommendations that we do bring forward are complementary.
Thank you, Asif. Just curious, Matt, did you want to say anything?
Are you able to hear me? Okay, good. Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that I think the breakdown was really good. It makes a lot of sense to move in that direction, especially when we're looking at other student societies that are using hybrid models and how that'll benefit. Right now, even for myself, I think it's I think it would make my role a little bit easier, being able to work directly with staff. And then also a lot of the things, sorry, I'm getting tired. It's just a lot of the stuff that would work a little bit better. I like the overview, and I think it was broken down really well into like why we need to do this, and also all the other comments. So I'm in agreement. Yeah.
Asif, you can go ahead.
So I think there might be some value right now in actually maybe having a motion to say that the governance committee is comfortable, because the thing is, I know we've all already been working on this, so we all have, a pretty decent understanding of this. But I think it will be good to kind of formalize it in the form of maybe a motion. So if the rest of the committee is open to it, I'm open to moving to amend the agenda to include a motion.
Sure, it's at your discretion as a member of the committee to move a motion if you would like. So go ahead. Also, do you have wording for the motion in mind if you just want to type it out in the chat?
Yeah.
All right, so so be it resolved that the governance committee, or sorry, be it my bad. So ASIB moves to amend the agenda to include the following motion. We'll include this after discussion items. So to include the following motion after discussion items. Be it resolved that the governance committee recommends the policy board / executive committee management hybrid model for adoption of the board of directors. So ASIB moves that motion. Is there a seconder for that motion?
Second.
Corbett seconds. So if we're amending the agenda in the middle of a meeting, we have to pass that at a 2/3 majority. So I think I'm going to, if there's no discussion on the motion, I'm going to ask for unanimous consent on the motion. So all those in favor seeking unanimous consent, please unmute your mic if you dissent. So seeing no opposition, that motion carries unanimously. So we will then move away from the discussion items and into the motion that we just added to the agenda. And Kristen, please let me know if I'm going too fast or if you need me to repeat anything. So I guess this is agenda item number 6 now. So be it resolved that the governance committee recommends the policy board / executive committee management hybrid model for adoption of the board of directors. Is there a mover for that motion?
I'll move. Awesome.
ASIB moves. Awesome, thank you. Is there a seconder?
I'll second.
Corbett seconds. Okay. Is there any discussion on the motion? Don't think there is much. We already hit it all. So I'm seeing no discussion. So I will also be seeking unanimous consent on this motion. So all those in favor of the motion seeking unanimous consent, please unmute your mic if you would like to dissent or abstain. I mean, vote against or abstain, pardon me. All right, I'm seeing no opposition. So that motion will also carry unanimously. Awesome, sounds good. And this document that ASIB was just going over, I think we will be tidying it up a bit, making it look a little pretty. And then it will go out to the governance committee and subsequently the board. Yeah. And I think we will try and do that tonight. Yes, for sufficient review before Monday. So that concludes our business items. We will move on to agenda item number 6, which is the next governance committee. meeting will be on a week today, Thursday, June 11th, 2020. And I guess I should mention that I think the the governance committee will be meeting on a weekly basis from now on. I think that, you know, we've almost had a 2.5 hour meeting here, and I think that the governance committee is a pretty busy committee, and we'll have a lot on our plate this board term. So it makes sense to me. And we kind of talked about this at the last governance committee too, after we moved X out of X camera, is that this is something that we probably, that we would like to do. So just to keep that in mind. All right, and then we also have our attachments there. So we'll move on to agenda item number 8 then, which is adjournment. So 8.1, be it resolved to adjourn the meeting at 5:35. Is there a mover for that motion?
Matt.
Matt moves. Thanks, Matt. Is there a seconder?
Balkis.
Balkis, thank you. I was almost afraid no one would second and we'd have to stay here. Is there no discussion on adjournment? So seeking unanimous consent on the motion. All those in favor? Okay, so seeing none, the motion carries unanimously and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. I know this meeting went over time, but you know, have a good night, have a good evening. Thanks for all your thoughts and contribution to discussion, and we will see you all tomorrow at the board development session.
Okay, bye.
Bye, Shanika.